Good afternoon.
I forgot how these are receptacles of rage and anxiety, so I should have trigger warning all of you. But thank you for being here and for watching and for sharing this space with us. So much gratitude to Rashida and to Simone and to Tina and to Saida and everyone, all of you here, and Legacy.
You said it. I just want to start, because we're sitting inside of that screen. And to reflect on to the words of kind of being in the break and then being in the wake, right? Where those two things occupy and what it means to kind of exist inside of a brokenness. I'm wondering maybe if you could talk a little bit about, what does it mean to kind of break these images? Because, as we look at these gardens that we just saw, can think so much about the kind of viral sensation of those gardens, where they've traveled and where we, maybe as Black folks, have seen these images. We've seen them on mugs. We've seen them in the doctor's office. We've seen them on mouse pads, right? All the kind of garden swag, if you will. And the thing that I think is really remarkable is the way in which, of course, you are centering the Black femme inside of this history and breaking apart how we neutralize these images. So by kind of putting us in the frame, right, it allows for us to think differently about the violence of these images as they circulate. So I'm wondering, Tavia, if you can maybe, let's start there, to talk about that idea of what that breaking is, right, breaking open that assumption of neutrality of the image.
Well, yeah, maybe I can start with a little bit of context, because this last film, Giverny 1, Négresse Impériale, it comes out of an experience in Giverny, France. I was awarded an art residency, my first ever artist residency in Giverny, France in 2016. And so I found myself in this space, and at the same time that all of this very extreme violence was happening. So I'm surrounded by this beautiful, bucolic luxury, while scrolling on the phone and seeing viral images of death. And so there was this extreme dissonance. There was a kind of fracturing and fragmentation that was happening internally and psychologically. I feel like you can almost feel that, coming off the screen. And that's like high key what I'm chasing. I'm trying to get you to have an effective response. I'm trying to get you to have a very, deep emotional response to what you're seeing. And then maybe we can tarry over the intellectual, right? So for me, I was attempting to reconcile what was happening and what was going on with me at the time. This is all very personal, while also responding to the things that are happening to the collective. I was removed from my care systems, right? I was alone in this place. I was supposed to be performing gratitude, right? I'm so happy to be here, which I'm totally happy to be here, right? I'm not performing, that's real. But I was, supposed to be a good little negress and enjoy the Calvados and the brie and the gardens. But I felt like I was in a straitjacket that was like delicate French lace, really beautiful straitjacket. So, this was me trying to work through all of those things. But I find that placing us in the frame is one thing, and then there's the idea of completely exploding the frame, right? I think I heard Rizvana Bradley say that for the first time, maybe in like 2017, right? And so experimentation and creating these fractures, creating these moments of like dissonance visually and sonically, for me is about opening up a space, right? You talk about in your book how the glitch is a space of subversion, right? And so for me, that's what this is about, because I'm completely ignoring the 3-act structure that you see in most films.
Can you talk a little bit about that, to the point of those points, that sort of the structure and the way the structure is reframed? Because I think some of the editorial decisions that you make, right, what is seen and not seen, right, what is renegotiated, as well as the way that you kind of reframe the frame is really important.
Yeah. So, I went to film school, and even before film school, I was studying film in undergrad. I studied Black studies and then, documentary studies. So I was going into film school, feeling like I knew a little something. But they were telling me, no, you have to do it this way. And I'm hard-headed and I didn't want to do it in the way that they wanted me to do it. So I just began to start creating these, these little projects that were going against the instructions, all right, just deliberately disobeying. And for me, it was not about beginning, middle, and end. It never really is. It's not about that line. It's about the circle, the loop. And I feel like the structure of a lot of my work is based on the Black musical tradition, right? I'm a Southern person. I was raised by Pentecostal evangelicals in the church. So there's all this music, right? There's this long tradition of sound. And for me, it is about the repetition, the loop, as much as it is about the break. You feel me? So, I don't know, for me, each work demands a new Jatavia, it feels like. Each work demands that I show up in a new space and completely recalibrate what I think each film should look like. There is no formula. So the idea that, boy meets girl, and then they have a falling out, and then they get back together, and there's this, redemptive denouement where everything has reached stasis again. You
don't give us that.
Yeah.
You don't give us that.
You're going to have to do a little work.
Right.
You're going to have to stretch a little bit beyond that nice little bow that's usually tied up at the end of the film. Because I don't think life is like that. I don't think that we have, I'm kind of against the project of hope. I don't know if there's a redemptive denouement for us. Mm-hmm. So, you're not going to get it in the film either.
Right. And I'm curious to hear you maybe reflect further, right, about kind of to be against that hope, right?
That sounds horrible.
No, but I think it's actually a really important maybe provocation, and I want to go there with you because there is something, of course, that's inside of both of these incredible works that we've just spent time with that pushes us further to ask questions about redemption and hope and forgiveness, right? Or as well, right, thinking about questions of unfreedom and freedom. So, Jatavia, can you maybe unpack that a little bit, right? Because I think that the relationship as a kind of through line is really important with the work that you make, and as well the ways in which you help us kind of see differently how the world can be authored.
Yeah, I think I'm just kind of really obsessed with the end of the world. I feel like I'm having like an existential crisis that's lasts like 38 years, long. And so I'm just kind of like always, I was telling Legacy that I can almost feel, and I told you all, I could feel the anxiety coming off of the work. And this is early work, like this is 2015 and 2017 mm-hmm. respectively, and things have kind of taken a shift, in terms of concept. Form is still, moving along in the same lines, but, conceptually I was responding to the moment, mm-hmm. right? And the moment was incredibly violent and brutal. I was at protests. I was working for a very well-noted white male filmmaker, so kind of toiling at his shop and then going home and etching around the face of Ruby Dee, trying to have some dignity, And then it just all felt at that time very, I'm trying to be positive, it all at the time felt a little bit, like it was all for naught, and that if I could just make these things and leave them behind, that perhaps someone would find them, at some other point and be transformed. Mm-hmm. You feel what I'm saying? So I don't know if that's answering your question at all, but I don't know. These were very emotional and very personal works, even though I'm only featured in one of them. I'm very much speaking to my own emotional landscape,
I'm curious about how you have taken the work, right? Because of course we just had the pleasure of seeing this on the big screen, right? And together in this auditorium. But you also, there was a moment, and if I'm remembering correctly, where some of these works existed on the internet during this very particular period of time of 2020, right? And I think the part that was so exceptional about that was that in your making the decision about where the work would live and how it might be screened differently, the way that it traveled was remarkable. I think folks were sharing those things and exchanging those things in real time, but also it to the point of the time that it was made, intersected with a moment that didn't feel so distant, right? So it kind of brought two parts of a historic arc together and then fractured that even further. So I'm curious to hear you maybe reflect about the time, of course, it was made, but then also, as we kind of stand in this moment now, in this very special space right now, what does it mean to kind of have your work have traveled in this way, right? That exists both within this format of screening, but also, of course, is intersected with the same sites that you have drawn parts of your archive from. You know, these sites of digital space, of online space, and how those things, of course, have this special relationship of being kind of in the glitch.
It feels like a lot of these moments of spectacular violence are not occurring online anymore, almost. You know, or maybe I'm wrong. You can correct me if I'm wrong. But there was a moment where we were seeing video after video after video after video, and now it feels like it's kind of underground because we were responding to the videos, right? People were going out on the street and they were setting shit on fire. So it's almost as if these things are still happening, but they are
visioned differently.
Yes.
Visioned differently.
It's not being traded, online in the same way. And so, I don't know. I think that, first of all, I'm grateful that the work has traveled. But I think also when we talk about these spaces of rarefied air, there was a dissonance for me in being there. And I think what Giverny 1 is also trying to touch upon is this kind of class difference, right? This class differentiation, like who gets to go to the garden, who gets to exist in the garden.
Absolutely.
What do the negresses in the garden owe the negresses who were not in the garden? So I don't know. I'm grateful for the work traveling, of course. I'm grateful for all of the things that have come about because of the work. But I do think that there's a part of me that has to trouble my own reality as a result of the work, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. I'm wondering if we can kind of switch perspectives maybe a little bit and talk a little bit about grief and witness, because obviously inside of both of these works, we are doing some amazing work, and you have kind of created that space of us being able to kind of think about Black femme space and how you are caring for these images, what the archival relationship is with the image, right? And then, of course, what it does for us to kind of bear witness, right, in exchange, in community. Can you maybe talk a little bit about that relationship? What does it mean to kind of have, the representation of both yourself, right, but also you're caring for other Black femmes that are in the frame?
Yeah, I think the care, and this is why Hartman and Sharp are so special to me, because the care is about that archival engagement, right? It's about like tarrying over that image for months. So a part of the process, we can talk about process for a minute, yeah. A part of the process is material, like direct contact with the material of the film, the 16 millimeter strip, right? So I'm etching into the emulsion of the film around Ruby Dee's face. And so there's 24 frames per second. So to do that 2-minute clip took me about 3 months, right? With my hand, right? Really trying to work through what I'm feeling. So I'm getting familiar and intimate with every nuance of Ruby Dee's face. Every lip curl, every eyebrow raise, every turn, every twitch. It's to me, that is what separates what I'm doing from many of my beloved peers, and this isn't me trying to flex, but the fact that I have a digital practice that is married to an archival practice, and that archival practice is analog, and that analog infuses such a deep amount of energy, like frenetic and kinetic life force that feels as though it is jumping off the screen. And so my care is evident in what I am choosing, how I am choosing it, and how I am treating the subjects in the frame. So the archival engagement of the work is so, it's just, it's paramount to my entire practice. And I know that it's sweeping the globe right now, this kind of archival, for those of you who study film or who make film, this kind of archival aesthetic. And I want to draw a distinction, and I have to cite Ayanna Dozier here, between an archival aesthetic and an archival engagement, right? We're all going on YouTube and grabbing things and making a little mashup, and it's cool, it's fine. Eisenstein would love that. Those Soviet montage guys, they would love that you're doing that. But I think the idea of tarrying with the image, of sitting with it, and understanding where it's coming from and why you are pulling it out of its context, and what new context are you attempting to create? What are you saying, right? So for any of the young filmmakers out there. That is my, my my message to you, what I encourage you to consider when you want to make a found footage film, when you want to make a mashup, is to really establish a relationship with the material, right? Instead of just, what's cool, what's gonna go with the song,
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Oh, thank you.
So, Jatavia, let's talk about performance, because this is an interesting thing that I think some folks are familiar with as they've followed your work, understanding your relationship to performance specifically, right? And of course, right, we see you featured in this work, but your relationship to performance-based practices is something that extends through and beyond the frame. So can you maybe reflect a little bit about, what does performance do within your practice, right? And kind of thinking as well about, the amazing and complex Black feminist radical traditions, right, of what that has meant for holding space for somatic work, what that means to you.
Yeah, so I've been an artist since I was a little girl, and before I was a filmmaker, I was an actor from like maybe 12 to like 25. So really young, learning poetry and prose and going to those oratory competitions and dressing really nice and getting a ribbon and all of those things. And then of course in church, of course. So like that was to me the first very real serious artistic practice that I had, and it carried on even to now, right? I'm not on stage now, but I am like, sneaking myself into my work, right? Like, how can I embody my ideas myself? And for me, shifting from performer to director was definitely about agency. It was definitely about control, and not wanting to small up myself to fit into some weird conception about what Black womanhood is and how it's represented in film and television, but rather how can I use my own self, employ my own body, my own voice, my own face in order to bring forth my own ideas. So there's a long line of performers, of course, folks like Ruby Dee, and who I feel like have pushed me to be a little bit more fearless. Because if I'm gonna be honest, I definitely ran away from acting. I definitely felt foreclosed upon in that space. And so coming back as a director and putting my own body into the space has felt quite liberating, right? I've been able to return to what I felt like was a self-actualizing and healing practice that I used as a young person. So the theater, being able to embody stories, embody an idea on stage in real time, for me, as a child, as a teenager, was something that was very healing. I had a very kind of disruptive and destabilized childhood, but I went to this performing arts high school where I had these very strong Black women who were putting me on to the Black literary tradition, and folks like Pearl Primus, like really trying to understand the tradition and locate myself in that tradition. So, the acting work or the performance work that you're seeing here is, of course, very different than the usual, the Hollywood stuff. But again, this is me attempting to meet my own needs, right?
I appreciate it. I'm hearing the tambourine, so that's our time.
That's
but I'm just so grateful for this moment, of course, Jatavia, with you, and grateful for the opportunity to be here with you all.
Thank y'all.
Thank you.